Good morning, and thank you for reorganising your schedule to accommodate this earlier than planned start time. As I go through the programme, the reasons for this will become evident. Can I also say that Anne McTaggart has sent her apologies today, and Sarah Boyack is substituting for Anne. To start with, we'll decide... Oh, sorry, I beg your pardon. I'm looking at the wrong thing. No, I'm not. To start with, we will decide whether to take items 4, 5, 6 and 7 of the agenda in private. Can we agree that? Agreed. Thank you. And today we have with us a panel from COSLA and 6 folks from COSLA today. Can I welcome Councillor David O'Neill, Chair of the Commission and President of COSLA, Councillor Rhonda Geekie, Councillor Drew Henry, Louise MacDonald, Jeff Maudsley and Adam Stewart, Secretary to the Commission. And this is to hear evidence in the Commission on strengthening local democracy in Scotland. And I wonder if you want to make an opening statement, Councillor O'Neill.
Thanks very much, Chair. Can I say at the start, we're actually not a delegation from COSLA. We are a delegation from the Commission on Local Democracy. And if I could just make the point about the title of the Commission, it is a Commission about local democracy and not necessarily about local government. And I'll say a wee bit more about that. Grateful to you for allowing us to start a bit earlier. Drew Henry and I have to be away about 10:30 or very soon afterwards. We've got a meeting with a swathe of Cabinet Secretaries who could only meet us today. Failing today, it would have been well into the new year before we could do that. So grateful to you for allowing us to come at this time. This is a really exciting time for myself as the President of COSLA and as the Chair of the Commission. The reason for that is that I believe that doing things locally is the most effective way of improving people's lives, and because as a country I believe that we need to do much better than we currently are. And what I mean by that, since probably the end of the Second World War, we have seen much been done which has improved the wealth, improved the health of our country, but it's all been a top-down approach with national strategies. What we have got with that is, while we have seen increases in wealth and undoubted increases in the health of our nation, we've also seen inequalities grow during that time. In particular, we have seen the gap between the haves in terms of wealth and the have-nots increase. And we've also seen the gap between or one of the examples of how that manifests itself, that gap in wealth, is the gap in health. We know that life expectancy has increased across the board, but life expectancy for those at the top and those at the bottom has actually, the gap has widened. Let me give you an example of that. You take 2 kids born today, perhaps in one of our cities and perhaps just a few streets apart. The first child is born into a community which suffers high levels of unemployment, high levels of deprivation, the unemployment being intergenerational. Take the other kid born perhaps just a few streets away, a different postcode, a different data zone, into a community which doesn't have unemployment, doesn't have high levels of deprivation. The kid for the latter community can realistically expect to live well into their 80s. They'll get their 70 years in 10 and then some extra, and the quality of their life during that lifespan will be good. And go back to the former, the kid born into the community which has high levels of deprivation, high levels of intergenerational unemployment. That kid will be lucky, extremely lucky, to see its 60th birthday. Fact, it will not see its 60th birthday, and with an additional bit of bad luck, will die before it's 50. That's a gap in life expectancy of 25 plus years. That's not acceptable in a modern, developed Western democracy. And that, in part, is what this Commission is about how we address the outcomes for our communities, how we address issues like that. And it is my belief that if we continue to try and fix these problems with a top-down approach, we will not improve the situation. In international terms, it's also clear that local democracy in Scotland is weak compared with the rest of Europe. Now, why do we think that's important? Because the places that we are looking to, for example, North European countries, Germany, Scandinavia, etc., where they do have very much a bottom-up approach, working with communities. They have far better outcomes for their communities, and the example that I gave of life expectancy there is a much, much healthier position than we have here in Scotland. So what this Commission is doing is to explore whether a more local approach can transform inequalities and improve outcomes for our communities. Second reason, it's no secret this is a crucial time for democracy. There is a huge debate taking place about Scotland's future, but to me that debate must be about improving people's lives in our community. That's the crux of the matter. It's not so much what the constitutional outcome is, but it's what that constitutional outcome does for our communities and whether it enables people to improve their quality of life. We brought the Commission together because we believe that there is space in that debate for all of us. And lots been said about decentralisation to Scotland, but much less about decentralisation within Scotland. I'm personally a great fan of devolution. That will come as no surprise to anybody round about this table. But it is devolution that should not stop at Edinburgh. It is devolution that most certainly should not stop at the council chambers. It should begin right down into the heart of our communities. As you speak to local people, their story isn't really about the workings of Holyrood or Westminster. It's about the local services that communities need. And I want this Commission to be about them and about giving people a real say about what matters locally. So it's about libraries. It's not about legal advice. It's about schools. It's not about submarines. It's about care. It's not about currency. These are the things that matter to people in their individual communities and within their family. We need to recognise that there will be new powers for Scotland, irrespective of the outcome in the referendum in September next year. Scotland will be a different place. But we need to think about where those powers should rest, and I believe that decisions should be made as close to communities as possible. Power isn't designed to stop at Holyrood, nor in the council chambers, and this Commission is about thinking what empowering local services and local accountability could really mean. Finally, we want to build on the commitment to local democracy all councils have already begun. Earlier this year, all 32 councils unanimously agreed to a vision, and that vision we called Local Matters. It sounds grand, but essentially what sort of local government do we want within 5 years' time, and what do we need to do to deliver it? Councils have been putting this at the heart of their work, but I wanted to test that thinking to find out what it would mean to really deliver on it. So I'd also like to say something about how we are working as a Commission. The Commission is independent. The Commission is not COSLA, it is not Scottish local government. There are no preordained conclusions to the Commission. I have been asked by the media that it's been suggested that I have got a fixed view of what there should be. What if the evidence proves otherwise? We will follow the evidence. We are not going to ignore the evidence. It would be a bizarre thing to do if we were to ignore the evidence, so we shall follow the evidence. And emphasising that it's not a COSLA Commission, we have an equal number of local government and non-local government members, some of whom are here today, and we are open to new ideas about our terms and our terms of reference are very broad, and we are supported by an independent secretariat. We are absolutely not driven by party politics. All the political parties and none in local government are represented, but we are all united in a belief in social justice, improving outcomes and reducing inequality. And we all believe that local democracy must be stronger in Scotland, whatever the outcome of the referendum. We understand there is a difference between local democracy and local government. Our focus is on stronger local democracy, not about grabbing powers for local government. We are open to change. I doubt that how things are done now will always be right for post-referendum Scotland, and doing things more locally involves looking at community representation, and here's quite a difficult word to say, and participative democracy, as well as representative democracy. This Commission is about working through these issues. So what I mean by participative democracy is it's not good enough for us to say that you'll get somebody to come out and vote once every 4 or 5 years, depending on how long the term is, and that's democracy. It has to be a bit much more than that, and actually engaging with people within our communities so that they have a real say, and that, I believe, would go some way to improving the ownership of local democracy, local services, and hopefully do something about driving up the participation. So in summing up, this is Scotland's first Commission on stronger local democracy. We want to put stronger democracy in the map. We are innovative, we are ambitious, and I believe that we are indeed breaking the mould. Too early to speculate about conclusions, but we believe that challenges and opportunities in Scotland need local solutions. One size does not fit all. We will have many instances where what applies in Glasgow does not apply in Orkney. What applies in Edinburgh does not necessarily apply in the borders. So it's not about one size fits all. We need local solutions. We are very much aware that there will be a new situation in Scotland, and we want to push power down to the lowest possible level, and we realise that better democracy is about Scotland's whole system of government, and it's not specifically just about local government. We will work in an independent, non-partisan and evidence-based way, and all our energies are going into setting up that process. Only then will we look at the recommendations. Finally, we hope that the committee will get behind our approach and use its influence to help and get that process started. We'd be delighted to receive a submission of evidence from the committee by the 20th of December, all being well. Thanks very much, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor O'Neill. I'm struck by certain of the things that you've said there. Obviously, a number of members of the committee have previously served in local government roles, so we're aware of some of the things that go on in councils across the country. Your phrase, schools, not submarines, resonated with me a little bit, particularly not Trident nuclear ones. But you've said in the past, Councillor O'Neill, that you want to see local government's place in the Constitution. I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about that, and maybe I could ask you how the committee is going to look at seeing how it is possible for local government to get a place in the Constitution. First of all, you'd actually need a Constitution to be able to do so. I wonder if you can maybe give us some more on that, please.
Okay, thanks, Chair. Local government as it exists in the United Kingdom today does not exist as a matter of right. It exists because another sphere of government has decided that it should exist. In the rest of the UK, that's because the Westminster Parliament has set up a system of local government in England and actually it's probably the devolved set up in Northern Ireland that's done it, and the Welsh Assembly that's done it in Wales. Here in Scotland, local government exists because the Scottish Government and the Scottish Parliament decide that we should. No one has said that they want to do away with local government. No one has talked about a wholesale reorganisation of local government. But we are not protected constitutionally. And if you look at the rest of the developed Western democracies, again, particularly Northern Europe, local government is contained there constitutionally. It's legislated that there shall be local government. Why do I feel concerned about that? Well, despite my youthful good looks, I have lived through a period of where a government decided to abolish Scottish local government. And many of you will recall when Strathclyde Regional Council had the temerity to campaign against the privatisation of Scotland's water industry, and they had the power and they had the strength to stop that happening. What they did not have was the power and the strength to stop a vengeful government from doing away with them, with abolishing the regional system in Scotland. Now, I'm not arguing that the regional system and district system, the two-tier system, was right. I'm not arguing that it was wrong. But central government should not have the power to decide whether there should be local government. The people should have that power to decide. And if anyone is going to abolish or change the system of local government in Scotland, that should only be done with the consent of the people, and it should not be done as at a whim. Your contention, Chair, that this protection can only come from a written constitution and an independent Scotland is one.
Mr O'Neill.
Your contention that it can only come from a written constitution is one that I reject. The United Kingdom does have a constitution. It is not written, but it is contained in case law, it is contained in custom and practice, it is contained in the fact that we have institutions within the United Kingdom who, by dint of the role that they play, are effectively could effectively be contained within that constitution. So I don't think we do need a written constitution, and one of the requests that COSLA made to the Scottish Government was that the European Charter and local self-determination should be included within the Community Empowerment and Renewal Bill. The Scottish Government have rejected that at this stage. That's something that the committee could help us with. It would be useful if there was amendments put in to see that the Charter should be included within the bill, and that would be a very large step in the right direction to ensure the constitutional protection for Scottish local government and local democracy.
I'm sure we're going to come back to the constitutional aspect. John Wilson, please.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning. Like Councillor O'Neill, I've lived through 2 council changes. I remember the old borough and county councils, which were changed in 1974. And then, as you quite rightly mentioned, the scrapping of the regional councils and the formation of the current local government structures that we have at the present time. So the changes that have been taking place, and Councillor O'Neill, you're right, these changes were made by Westminster governments, not by Scottish parliaments, not by Scottish governments. These changes were made by Westminster for particular political reasons, I would argue. And I think you alluded to one of them, which was the Strathclyde region's referendum on the water industry, but also the wonderful campaign that Strathclyde and Lothian region were involved in terms of the benefits take-up in the 1980s, late 80s, early 90s, which led to the demise of the regional councils as a format. But to go to the heart of what you're saying in terms of the Commission for Local Democracy, I note from the panel that you've pulled together, there is no one representing community councils or residents and tenants associations. And many of these community councils feel that they are a form of local democracy that goes beyond local government, because sometimes they feel local government is too large a structure, is too far removed from the decision-making at a local community level. Could I ask why you felt it was unnecessary to invite representatives of community councils or residents and tenants associations to form part of your commission to examine the role of local democracy? I'm going to try and take everybody in here, so if we could have brief answers, I'd be grateful. Councillor O'Neill.
Yeah, the Commission has got 20 members, half of them are not from local government. We have a very substantial representation from the third sector, and perhaps I could leave it to them to say a wee bit more. But
say that the third sector does not represent community councils, and community councils, I think, would quite rightly reject that they are a body, and they were created in 1974 at the time the regional councils were actually scrapped. It was seen as a form of local democracy at local level that could interact with local authorities, and they were given certain obligations and certain commitments at the time they were created in 1974. which they feel they haven't been listened to or aren't fully engaged. Not with every local authority, but certainly with some local authorities tend to bypass or ignore community councils. And it's, as I said, my question is about why community councils or residents' tenants associations were not included in the Commission. Irrespective of the size of your Commission, I do feel they are a local democratic body at a local level that are trying to engage actively with local authorities that seem to have been ignored in your Commission.
Well, what I was going on to say was not only do we have third sector representatives within the Commission, but we have put out a call for evidence. That includes community councils, it includes community associations. I personally am a great fan of community associations. I think they do a power of work within their communities. But it is open to anyone who wishes to make a submission to us, and we would be happy to sit down with them and discuss their points of view.
Yeah, I think every community council as well has a different view, and I think it would be very difficult for us to make sure that they are actually represented properly within the Commission. I think it's a much better way to do it is to ask them for evidence. Certainly I go and sit, and I'm sure others go and sit on community councils at their meetings and talk them through what we're doing. But to ask for evidence, you would get probably one community council talking against the other. It would be a very difficult thing, even within one ward or one, because we have some community councils that have more than one in a ward. So it would be a very difficult thing to get a representation, I believe, from community councils in the way that's suggested that they sat in the Commission. A much better way is to actually bring it all together from all of them and make a statement on that way, rather than to do it the way you're suggesting, having them sitting on the Commission. And just to go back to some of the things that David was saying about the locality and the areas of deprivation, because I represent Eastern Bartonshire, which is always thought of as the leafy suburb. But there is, in my own area, we do have areas of deprivation, which is often ignored when we look at the thing nationally, because it's never thought of in that way. And we work together with the voluntary sector, community councils, private sector in partnership to tackle early intervention in areas that we have, because even within, as I say, one council area, and within a couple of miles, there can be a 10-year age aspect in the way people will live and their expectation. So I think all of that has to be taken into account as well. But I take your point about, as I say, community councils. I used to be a community councillor, so I know how they feel, and certainly we are not going to ignore them. They will be brought into this, but it would be very difficult, I think, for them to sit on the Commission.
Sir Henry, please.
Yeah, I think it's a well-made point, actually, that we do have to engage better with community councils and tenants groups. I think they're a very important part of the work that the Commission should be looking at. I do take the point that you always start from an imperfect place, and I think that to get absolutely everybody you would need to represent local democracy in Scotland into one room at any given time is going to be a challenge that's probably beyond us at this point to actually do that. However, I mean, certainly for my part, and I'm sure that other members would insist on this too, I think taking genuine concern or genuine care to make sure that the concerns and the participation, more importantly, of both community councils and the tenants groups would be an absolutely critical part of the work, given that the general sense and feeling in Scotland about actually empowering people more to take more of their own decisions here in Scotland is about creating more community planning partnerships and doing more with the community across a wider base. Therefore, we have to be, it's one of the imperatives for us to be inclusive. If we at the end of the Commission have failed to be inclusive with community councils and tenants groups, the work will not be worth the paper it's written on at the end of it. So we'll have to take that into account. We will have to do that work.
Ms MacDonald.
Yes, thank you. I mean, I would agree with that. My day job out with the Commission is I'm Chief Executive of Young Scot, the National Youth Information Charity for young people aged 11 to 26 across Scotland. And Young Scot is a membership organisation for young people, and we have over 520,000 members across Scotland. On receiving the invitation to join this commission, one of the things that I was very, very keen to do was to ensure that our position was about not shutting anybody out of this debate. So absolutely, that your point is well made about us making sure that we listen to community councils, tenants associations, but equally a whole range of other groups. And one of the kind of priorities that I have to say I've been reassured over has been the commitment of everyone on the Commission to make sure that that happens. We are at the start of this process, but I've been kind of left in no doubt that there is a real willingness to really go beyond and go as hard as we can to reach out and hear communities across Scotland and be listening to kind of different voices in this conversation. So absolutely, your point is well made, but I think we are at an early stage, and I think we have mechanisms in place that will allow that engagement to happen, but actually are also open to other mechanisms. So if there's other ways that we can listen to people and engage people, then we would really want to hear that.
Mr Maudsley.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I'm director of the think tank Reform Scotland, and certainly one of the things that we've advocated is a stronger role for community councils. We did a survey of community councils in one of our papers, Renewing Local Government, that we published last year. And I think there is a greater role for local government, and one of the areas I hope this Commission will look at is how we do push power down closer to communities. And that isn't just community councils, there's other ways of doing it as well, and involving local people. But I would certainly be very disappointed if we didn't engage very seriously with community councils and other representatives of communities, and I'll certainly be pushing for that on the Commission. So I think you can be assured that we will certainly be taking a lot of evidence from those groups, because they are a key part, absolutely.
Sir Wilson.
Given the timing of this discussion, Convener, I'm quite happy to leave further questions to a later date.
Okay, in which case, Richard Baker next, please.
Thank you, Convener. In the remit you supplied us, in terms of reference for the Commission, you said that one of the areas you're going to look at in terms of objectives is to investigate a local approach to services and accountability. And in Councillor Neil's opening remarks, you mentioned some concerns over, a top-down approach. Now, obviously, in this Parliament, we've debated for some time the tension between, trying to achieve efficiencies through national delivery of services and the tension between that and local accountability, for example, in police and fire services most recently. So I was wondering if you had any initial thoughts about what needs to be done to achieve greater accountability in delivering local services, what needs to change in terms of the current approach, and if there's any particular areas of concerns. When you mentioned top-down approach, Councillor Neil, is there any particular areas you're thinking of, or areas for improvement that inform that kind of concern that the Commission seems to have?
Councillor O'Neill.
Two things about that. The words efficiency and effectiveness are not necessarily the same, nor are they necessarily mutually exclusive. An example that I will give for that is there's been criticism down south recently about care workers going in to see that an elderly person is okay and has taken their medication and has taken their food, and that's a 15-minute visit, saying that that's not enough. Now, that is certainly efficient in as much as 15 minutes will do that job of work, and they can see 3 or 4 people in an hour doing that. What you've got to ask yourself, however, is it effective in doing what we actually want to do, to give that elderly person human contact, to give them the confidence to live in their own home and know that they're going to be okay, and thereby reducing the number of unplanned admissions to hospital, which is a big problem with the elderly people. So getting the balance right between efficiency and effectiveness is something that so far I don't think we have necessarily been very good at, and we do need to get better at it. And that's across the whole of the public sector. It's not something that's peculiar to one area of it. Also, quite often a term that is used is about a postcode lottery for services. Well, local government and local agencies do not necessarily deliver services exactly the same across the whole of Scotland, and it would be ridiculous to think that they should. Nor do local authorities necessarily deliver services across the council area exactly the same. You tailor the services to suit the needs of the community. Now, let me give you 2 examples, both from my own council, from North Ayrshire. 7 or 8 years ago, North Ayrshire Council built a brand new secondary school in the island of Arran. Arran has got a population of 5,000. The mainland of North Ayrshire has got a population of 130,000. Arran takes up half the land mass of North Ayrshire. We would not dream of building a secondary school for 300 pupils in the mainland, but it was appropriate on the island of Arran to do so, so we did that. North Ayrshire does not configure its care services for the elderly at home on the island of Arran the same as we configure them in the mainland. It would be bizarre to do that. We tailor them to suit the needs of the communities and the people that we are serving. That is not a postcode lottery. That's local decision-making, local priority setting, and tailoring the services to what's needed.
I'm aware that you're telling us what happens at this moment in time in terms of local councils making the appropriate local decisions for certain areas. But I think Mr Baker was trying to get to the point about top-down rather than the flexibilities that you have within the current system. You talked at the very beginning round about life expectancy in certain areas. Obviously, one of the main reasons, I think, for that shortened life is poverty. And yet the tax and benefit system is controlled by Westminster, where we have really no say here, and local government has no say either. How do we deal with that situation, I think, is the thrust of Mr Baker's question.
I think that's a very relevant point, and some of the discussions that we have been having on welfare reform, we've been making similar points to the UK government, that there needs to be more local flexibility. Again, let me give you an example, and again I'll use North Ayrshire as an example. The DWP spend almost as much in North Ayrshire as North Ayrshire Council spend. If North Ayrshire was able to influence a few percentage points of that spend and spend it in local priorities, for example, youth unemployment, which is a terrible problem within North Ayrshire, we could make a tremendous difference, and it would mean that there would be less need for DWP to be paying out in terms of benefits. In England, we have the cities deal, whereby cities have been allowed to have a treasury function, so the entirety of public expenditure is controlled from the one centre within that city. And if that city is able to reduce the spend that the DWP needs to make, for example, by getting people back into work, instead of that money just going straight back to the Treasury, a percentage of it remains in the city. And it then becomes almost a self-fulfilling prophecy that they are able to do more and more within the city. I think that city deal, which has been run out for the large cities in England, has currently been run out for some of the smaller cities, is something that would be of great interest here in Scotland. But that we need a tripartite discussion between local government, the Scottish Government and the UK Government. But I think that would be worthwhile having. Okay, does anyone else want to come in that point? Because we are pretty short of time. Councillor Henry.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I mean, I think one of the things that's pointed out earlier is there are different views on the Commission about both the constitutional and about the effect of actually tackling the top-down approach, if you like. I mean, I think, you know, rather than a few percent, I would rather see all of it in Scotland being able to be controlled, and I think that's a point I would have a point of difference with other members of the Commission about. You know, I think we should have welfare here. But I think the key point was, how do you approach that top-down, and how do you challenge that top-down system that we have at the moment? Well, there is an opportunity for us not only to look at how we might gain additional powers, but actually look at how we might re-examine the powers that we have at the moment, which I think is a real deficit both within local government, within communities and across the piece, that we perhaps don't understand what we've got here to actually use just now. But if you can then look at how you would enhance that, with future opportunities of having greater responsibility within Scotland, I think there is a real massive opportunity for change to make sure that communities can actually build up. And there is good work going on the ground to actually tackle some of these inequalities that we have at the moment through communities. There are existing examples of where we're working with communities. I can give you examples in my own local authority in Highland, where we've actually been collaborating on community planning partnerships to make that work just now. So there is good work there just now, but there's an awful lot that we have to look, and I hope that what we get is a thorough examination of how to challenge the existing models.
Mr Maudsley?
Yeah, just very briefly. I think there is an important link between taxation, representation and expenditure, as you say. And I think we've done a lot of work on, obviously, how fiscal powers could be devolved from Westminster to Holyrood. But it can't stop there. The same arguments that apply to that must also apply to the relationship between Holyrood and local government. And we should be looking at pushing those powers further down. But I accept the point that it doesn't require, I think, independence, but it certainly requires a major transfer of fiscal power to enable us to give local government the ability to raise, at least I would have thought, the majority of its own revenue, which I think would be a huge boost to the autonomy of local government. Certainly something that we are keen to explore, well, certainly I'm keen to explore as part of the Commission, how we might do that and test that proposition.
Thank you. Sarah Boyack, please.
On very neatly with the question I was going to ask, which is about the funding, because at the moment local government controls around or just less than 20% of your income, and it was about the variety of funding opportunities. There are new schemes such as TIF schemes, the Business Rates Incentivisation Scheme, but fundamentally both the council tax and business rates are not under your control, and it's the extent to which this is on your agenda, because if you're taking a more localised view of expenditure, what is the income generation? And the Scottish Parliament is already going through quite significant changes as a result of the Calman Commission. So the Scottish Parliament will have more control over its resources in the future. How are you constructing the parallel discussion at the local level? Because I think you started off very correctly about talking about social justice and outcomes and services. That's a parallel discussion in terms of solidarity and how you spread income across the country. It's a huge issue, but I think it'd be really useful to get a sense of what the principles are that you're looking at in terms of local government funding. And then once you've established local government funding, or in parallel, what about the community level? Because we talked a little bit about community councils, but what are the funding issues if you're looking at a more locally driven agenda, which is not, as David said, just about local councils?
I'm going to take Councillor Geekie first, please.
Thank you. Probably going back to actually what was said about the welfare reform and what's happened there, you're absolutely right.
Could you be very brief?
I will take it to
very, very brief, because
yeah.
I've got a number of other folk who want to come in. We've only got a few minutes left, please.
Yes, I was going to make the comparison, though. You're absolutely right. We have no control just now over our council tax and the amount we set that at. And so all of those things we have to manage, and we have got less and less funding to do that with. But the expectation, because of all the issues, is higher and higher, and we are having to manage that. So what we are asking for, if we are going to have to look after all our citizens and be responsible for them, then we should have the power to have some sort of tax raising in some way. We shouldn't have that taken away from us, because I'm sure in every council area the people have this huge expectation of what we should be able to deliver, and certainly because of all the things with the reforms that are happening, that is getting higher and higher and getting more difficult for us. So we've got this expectation, but actually very little control now locally. It is being eroded year on year by the different things that are coming in, and I think that is a big concern for us, and we would like that
Ms MacDonald,
resolved.
do you have a view on that?
I suppose I was just kind of thinking about the kind of the question, and some of the kind of questioning is just is how technical a lot of some of this debate, and how quickly that can become quite kind of technical, and I suppose in some of this I'm kind of thinking about how do we have this kind of conversation at a very, at a local level. So at the point when this commission is actually going out and taking evidence hearings and so on, my thought would actually be, Sarah, is how do we kind of have that kind of conversation? How do we kind of discuss those and get an understanding of what that means, what it looks like, what it feels like? I'm not a councillor. I don't work in local government. I don't have that as part of my background. So for my position on the commission, if you like, is thinking about how do we have that conversation in you know, a youth centre, you know, in 6VT on Victoria Street along the road. How do we have that conversation there, and what would that kind of look like? So in some ways, your question and the questioning this morning is really just making me think about how the Commission might really explore some of these these issues.
Very briefly, Ms Boyack, I'll let you back.
Yeah, I think that's why I asked about the principles that would underpin it, because rather than getting into the technicalities of different types of funding, it's as much what are the principles, in the same way you've set that out very clearly for the Commission. So I think that would be useful to us around the table in terms of what the principles are you think should drive funding for local government finance, but also community finance, and thinking about how you might actually get that discussion going. So I think that's the thing I was really keen to try and tease out. You know, issues like stability, certainty.
I said briefly because I've got 3 other folk and we've only got a short time. So stability, all of the rest of it. Mr Stewart, do you want to talk? As
it was only really to confirm the point that the issue around about resources and raising local revenue is one of the elements of the terms of reference for the Commission. So we will be looking at that quite hard. We've already begun that process by gathering, as Louise MacDonald has mentioned, some public opinion around about this and the issue of, I guess, visibility of how your money is spent locally and whether that's something that needs to be improved. So it's very much on the agenda. It's a little bit too early to make conclusions at this stage, but we will be looking at that.
And Stuart McMillan, please.
Thank you, Convener. Who decided how the membership of the Commission was going to be, and how was it set up?
Councillor O'Neill.
Well, the Commission, as I said, comprises 20 members. We had to try and get a balance of getting a wide range of people. I think we've been reasonably successful in doing that. We have 20 members who are there to challenge. No one is there to sit meekly by. We could have made the Commission bigger, but you know, getting the balance right in terms of size, we settled on 20, and I think we've got a fairly good range.
It struck me that in terms of the balance of the Commission, of 20 members, there are 16 men and 4 women, and there is no one from an ethnic background. So how is that balanced?
Councillor O'Neill.
Well, I think that sadly reflects the reality of Scottish public life now, in particular for those in local government elected representatives. We saw the introduction of the single transferable vote, which...
Seconds. I mean, I accept your point regarding local government, but obviously 10 members are not local councillors.
Coming there. We saw the introduction of the single transferable vote, which was claimed would increase diversity. It did not. Scottish local government is more than ever dominated by white middle-aged men, me and folk like me. Within the sectors out with local government, had we tried harder, could we have got more women on it? I'm sure we could. But we were limited to how many people we thought was a workable number. I don't think that it's a perfect mix that we have, but I am confident that every single one of the 20 who are there because of their skill set, and they're not there just to sit and keep quiet. They're there to challenge.
Okay. Cameron Buchanan, please.
I notice it's a very bullish submission you've got here, but I'm very concerned about the timescale. How are you going to do all this you've written here, setting out local approaches, identifying long-term characteristics in 3 months? It seems very, very tight. If you're going to consult with everybody, how come we can do it in such a short time?
Mr Maudsley, do you want to have a crack at that?
Yeah, I think the way it's been set out, I mean, Adam will probably add to it in terms of the process, but I mean, I think we've got a heavy work programme, but I think everyone on the Commission is committed to it. We've got stakeholder sessions that are lined up to discuss some of the key players and make sure we're taking evidence from all the relevant bodies. And it's a 2-stage process. I mean, I think if you look at it, the initial report is coming out in that 3-month period, and then there's a later report as well. So I think we're all confident that we can do that, but we accept that it is going to require quite a lot of time to take the necessary evidence. Absolutely.
Mr Stewart. Yeah, sorry.
What happens if you overrun?
Mr Stewart. Well, To confirm, we are doing this in 2 stages, and we've already begun quite a great deal of work around about that initial part. Really, that first stage is about asking people, what do you think about local democracy at the moment, and what could that look like in the future? And we've got a number of ranges of mechanisms to collect that, whether that's opinion survey, focus groups, stakeholder sessions, listening events with a whole range of different demographics taking place. By March, we hope to be able to say, we've asked the question and here are the answers that people are telling us. That really should give us some principles that we can work on. So if that's what people are telling us, then what does the future look like in terms of recommendations for change? And that report will be into the summer in terms of what does the landscape look like in the future. So it is a very tight timescale. There's a power of work going into that at the moment. January and February, I think Commission members are meeting almost twice a week to take evidence to allow that to happen by March in the first instance.
Mark MacDonald, please.
Thank you, Convener. 2 questions, if I may. The first follows on from what Stuart McMillan was saying, because I spoke to some of my community groups about the fact that I had the Commission before us today and showed them the membership. And one of the points was, as Stuart McMillan said, why are there so few women? The other one was, why are there so many politicians? And did you consider the possibility of having a Commission without political input, which could then report back to COSLA and might avoid the potential for the recommendations being challenged as having a political motivation?
Councillor O'Neill first, please.
I started off by saying this is a commission on local democracy and not a commission about local government, but obviously local government plays a substantial and significant role within that. You cannot ignore the fact that the local government is there, and it'd be a bit bizarre not to have local government involved.
Councillor Geekie is one of only 4 women in the Commission. What's your view?
Yeah, I did make the point early days about often and loudly about the female representation. As only one of 2 women leaders in Scotland, I make that point often. But yeah, I mean, I think I think what we're trying to do is, sorry, I've missed the point of your question. I beg your pardon.
It was simply to say, with there being 10 councillors on the Commission, is there the risk that the recommendations could be seen by some as having a political motivation rather than being about the delivery of local democracy?
I think, as David has said, it would have been very strange, I think, if local councillors hadn't actually been represented, and we wanted to make sure that all parties were represented as well. But as some of the other commissioners have said, the people that actually know what happens in local government best are obviously leaders of councils and leaders of political groups. So it would have seemed a bit strange. I think we would have been criticised if we hadn't been part of it. You know, so you don't want to spend the time and do the work to actually be part of it. You know, that could have been a criticism as well. It's a very difficult thing, but we do take your point. But as I say, I think it would have been a very strange situation if we hadn't been part of this.
Councillor Henry?
Well, just on both matters, I mean, I'm on record at COSLA of actually saying right at the beginning that we had the balance wrong in terms of gender mix and ethnic mix, and you know, it was a clear concern for me when we started out. I'll also mention earlier today, I think it's imperfect because of the representation that we don't have on that commission just now. I think the key point is that has already been made is that this is a starting off point, and local government are doing this. They're pulling this together and they're driving this. So therefore, in terms of pulling this first stage, and I think it's the first stage on the journey together, then it's probably appropriate that we took that, and it probably explains the imbalance, the natural imbalance that's there in terms of having, you know, a large degree of council engagement on it, and perhaps the other areas not being so well represented at this point. But I think the opportunity for the next few months in terms of the workload going forward to actually take into account those issues and those problems is there for us as well. So I don't think that should be exclusive. That shouldn't be, our work shouldn't be exclusively about how we actually come to our opinions, but it should also be about how we take those other views on board as part of that journey. Because as I've said previously, if we don't get it right, if we can't get it right at the end of whatever timescale we put onto us, it's not going to be worth it. So we need to make sure that's thoroughly examined.
Ms MacDonald is one of the independent members.
Yeah, I suppose a couple of things. I mean, in some ways, I would hope, I kind of take the point, but I hope I'm not on the Commission just because I'm a woman. So I think that would be the first thing. I also kind of think, you know, in all of these things, it's always an interesting kind of discussion, because I'm quite sure, you know, on a lot of the kind of groups that we're all on, do I represent every 40-something woman in Scotland? No, I don't. I think we're there because we have diverse experience.
Representing young people, can I ask, in your capacity?
I'm not young.
But in your capacity of job?
I would have a route to engaging young people, absolutely. So creating that opportunity, I think, is part of that, and being able to create the space for that conversation to happen with different groups. And I think that's also part of the diversity of the groupings. So we have Pam Duncan and others that are there who can reach out to kind of different groups. The other kind of thing is I'd actually say that rather than kind of us going off in separate rooms and having separate conversations, councillors in one room and local government in one in another, actually, is it not? I mean, are we not always kind of, you know, asked and encouraged to actually have these conversations together, do this work together? And so for me, I actually think it's a sign of kind of healthy democracy in itself that actually we're able to, absolutely able to challenge. That's been clear already from the meetings we've had, but also just bring in that diverse grouping. So I agree, it could be better, but I think we can build on the diversity that's required.
Mr. Maudsley.
Yeah, I think, you know, you're never going to get a perfect grouping of this number of people, but I think the evidence sessions, as we discussed, can, I think, bring in other groups that need to be consulted on this. And I think from our point of view, the attraction to getting involved is an opportunity to discuss issues which we've obviously done a lot of work on, we think are very important, and they don't necessarily see the sort of level of publicity that some other issues do. And I think it's also a chance to test some of the ideas and put them out there to have greater scrutiny from the sort of people that you're talking about, the wider community. And I think on the political side, I don't think it is necessarily that political. If you're talking about local democracy, you can agree on where the power should lie without necessarily agreeing on how those powers should be used. That is the whole essence of local democracy. And I think that's why this commission is important. It's about local democracy, and it's about enabling people to shape their own lives and their communities' lives. And that's what's important to us as an organisation. We've done a lot of work on that, and that's what we'll be looking to discuss and debate in the course of the Commission.
Mr. MacDonald.
Yeah. Okay, so to come back to the idea of healthy local democracy, right now, if people want to, they can log on to the internet and they can watch this committee proceeding. Later on, they'll be able to read everything that's been said at this committee proceeding. When I was a local councillor, if one of my constituents wanted to look up a decision at a council meeting, they could see the motion that was tabled, the amendment to that motion, and the vote that was taken. They couldn't see a single word that was said. They couldn't watch proceedings unless they attended the meeting at the townhouse. Is the Commission looking at how we strengthen accountability and transparency of decision-making in local government?
Councillor O'Neill.
Used the word earlier, participative democracy, and part of that participation is being able to scrutinise representative democracy. I must say, I spent 13 years as the leader of North Ayrshire Council. Very seldom did we have any items which were taken in private, and it was only if you were really talking about an individual. But I'm also very conscious of the fact that very seldom did members of the public come along. It was only when there was some sort of controversial decision being taken. So I take your point.
So will the Commission itself be looking at that aspect of televising, webcasting, recording much better what goes on, not just the decisions, but also what happens in council chambers across the country? Mr. Stewart.
Yeah, just to confirm that, I think that is a point that has been raised by the Commission members, and we're very keen to make sure that the Commission leads by example in terms of those processes. So we've mentioned a few elements of different elements of data collection or evidence panel sessions. We're working with a number of people at the moment to try and do some of the webcasting, podcasting, interaction through social media and a whole host of other areas. So we are trying to make that as accessible as possible. Our papers are public. They're available on the website as a starting point there.
Has anybody else got comment on that?
Add to it, Convener. Yeah. I think that if we're going to have the serious discussion that I think we're going to have about additional power devolving down to local government, people need to have some assurance that they will be able to effectively scrutinise the way local government is operating. And one of the ways might be for, I know that some councils do webcasting, but for example, verbatim reports of council meetings which don't occur might be something that needs to be considered.
Councillor Hendry, I think you want to come in there.
Just a very brief point. I think it's vital or transparent for all aspects of the process, because we're talking about local communities being able to see and being able to participate in what we're doing. The only way to get that kind of reach is to let them see and hear what we're doing. So it's absolutely vital to have that transparency.
Mr Wilson.
Just on the issue of power and who makes decisions. Now, the difficulty I have is that almost some of the answers we've had today almost predetermines the outcome of this commission, and that is local government makes decisions about how it raises its money, how it spends its money. If this is truly about local democracy, then how do we ensure that we get the power to the communities to make the decisions? We already have that in terms of some of the community planning partnerships and some of the area management committees that exist throughout Scotland that have been established by local authorities who allow local area and community organisations, along with elected members, make decisions at local budget setting levels. So how do we get to that stage where we genuinely can look at a situation where power has been devolved, not just to local government, but devolved to local communities to make decisions about how local authority funding is spent within their areas?
Okay, I think they've got the gist, Mr Wilson. Very brief answers here, please. Councillor Geekie first, please.
We certainly do a huge consultation at budget time about that very point and consult with people about how they would see, obviously because of the pressures we are all under, and ask them how they would want us to determine our funding for the following year. We are involved in that all the time, working with local people. But the other thing, of course, is that a lot of our funding actually goes out to these organisations, the very organisations you're talking about in the community that are actually delivering for local people, and we're part of the funding of that. So I think that's our meaningful involvement is important.
Councillor O'Neill.
It's certainly about much more than devolution to local government. It absolutely has to be about devolution into the communities. An example that I will give, the man or woman who runs the local boys or girls football team, they're doing much more than just running a football team. They're engaging the kids in diversion activities, they're engaging them in lifestyle choices and health activities. I don't know anything about running football teams. Why am I sitting in the council chambers taking decisions about that? It's the people who are involved, the people at the grass face, if you like, who should actually be doing it. But what we need to be careful that we don't do is that we place upon these people a burden which they don't have the skill set to manage, but absolutely have them involved. At least involved in the
I'm sure we'll be dealing with a lot of that during the discussion round about the community engagement, empowerment and renewal bill. Power devolved is power retained, some folks said, and there was lots of talk of devolution there. Councillor Henry.
Yeah, just on the subject of, how can we make sure it works, how can we get that engagement. I think one of the challenges for us throughout this process in the Commission, and one of the challenges day to day to us, is to actually act as an enabler, but a proper enabler, not just a body or a council or an organisation that says, look, we'll help you do this, but actually gives people the abilities, opens up the opportunities for them to actually participate properly. So all of those things I would agree with in terms of consultation and so forth, but we really have to start to look at what do communities want to do in terms of building up a local plan from their community council, ward level, into other levels. What are their priorities? And therefore, start to work in that way. But it's about being open-minded. It's about making sure that we've used all of our existing thinking, all of our existing powers, look at what we need to enhance that, and making sure that we've opened all those doors, properly opened all those doors, provided the support training, like I say, becoming a proper enabler.
Stuart McMillan, very briefly.
It is, thank you, Convener. Just under point 5 of your remit, when they talk about the current landscape of democracy in Scotland, are you going to be looking at the CPPs, ALIOs and CHCPs and other such bodies as well?
Mr Stewart is the Secretary of the organisation.
We clearly are looking across the whole system of government, and I think that was clear from Councillor O'Neill's opening statement. We realise that local government is only one element of this. The whole system of government is really about pushing power down to local levels. We haven't had specific discussions on partnership arrangements, whether it's ALIOs or CPPs. However, as part of the evidence gathering process in the early new year, we're looking at a number of themes. One of those themes is about partnership and integration, and we're inviting a host of people in to scrutinise that issue in more detail. It's clearly a little bit early to say anything about the conclusions of that, but that is certainly part of the work programme.
Mr Maudsley, do you have a view on that?
Yeah, I think certainly we've done a lot of work on democratic accountability and how we can look at quangos more generally, and I think it's certainly something we should explore as part of the Commission. I think there is a question mark about how democratic, and if we're looking at local democracy, I think we have to look at the accountability of all organisations. So I would certainly be pushing for us to look at that, yeah.
Thank you. In the opening statement, Councillor O'Neill, you mentioned local government in areas such as Germany and Scandinavia. Can I ask you if the Commission is going to take evidence from local government and local bodies elsewhere, like in Germany and Scandinavia, which you gave as examples?
We would hope to be able to do that. And one of our Commission members is the past Chief Executive of Secretary General of CIMA, which the Committee of the Regions. So there's experience within the Commission about that, but we certainly want to be able to look at what these other places are doing.
Does anybody else have a view on whether you should talk to folk elsewhere to see what their experiences are and their constitutional position? Councillor Henry.
Absolutely. I think it's vital for us to take a look out of Scotland into other countries where these things are working and have been proved to work. I think it would just be common sense for us to do that. And I would, for my part, I'd be looking for us to do that for certain. Yeah.
Mr Maudsley?
Yeah, I think definitely, because I mean, there's a huge amount to learn from other countries. I mean, we're talking about community participation, and many of these countries have much lower tiers of local government, much closer to their communities, which have, very significant powers. So I think there's a lot we can learn about how we can make the system more flexible, more responsive to local communities. So countries like Norway, where that, local authorities at a very local level have quite significant financial powers as well as powers over other areas.
Thank you, Mr Stewart.
And really just to confirm on that point, we're very pleased that the Commission actually is making its presence felt in Europe, and particularly in Brussels. We understand there's a number of submissions coming in from some of our sister organisations across Europe as part of our first evidence gathering process. We've also commissioned some desk-based research looking at the Charter of Local Self-Government and how the UK and Scotland compare against that. So there are some steps in motion that may lead to further discussions probably in the early new year.
Can I thank you very much for your evidence this morning. I realise that it's quite a short time to fit everything in, and we may get back to you in certain points. I wish you success with your meetings later on today, and I suspend this sitting until 10:45.
It would be really useful if you did make a submission to the Commission.
Councillor O'Neill, we're really not in the business of making a submission, but what we will do, without a doubt, is keep a very close eye on what you're doing, and also take into consideration a number of the points that you have made today. Very briefly, Mr Wilson.
Convener, thank you. Just on that point, it may be useful for the committee to take further evidence from the Commission at a later date once you've gathered some information and some of the, so that we can actually then have a further discussion on the progress of the Commission.
Yeah, we'll certainly be discussing that later on. I suspend now until 10:45. Okay. Right, okay. Welcome back. Item 3 today is an oral evidence session on the annual report of the Commissioner for Ethical Standards in Public Life in Scotland. I'd like to welcome our panel, D. Stuart Allen, the Public Standards Commissioner for Scotland, and Helen Hayne, Investigations Manager for the Commission for Ethical Standards in Public Life in Scotland. Can I welcome you? Good morning. Would you like to make any brief opening statements?
Thank
Mr.
you,
Allen.
Convener. Thank you to the committee for inviting us this morning. I have circulated a brief opening statement, so I'll be able to be very short in my opening remarks. The annual report for the year 2012-13 covers the business of the Commission for Ethical Standards in Public Life, including the Public Standards Commissioner and Public Appointments Commissioner. As a result of further public services reform, the Commission and the Commissioner's functions were merged into a new office of Commissioner for Ethical Standards as from 1st July of this year. It's in the latter capacity I'm statutorily responsible for writing the report on the work of the former Commission and Commissioners. Now, during the year, the two distinct offices of public standards and public appointments have worked particularly effectively together, and the natural synergy of the work has meant it's been a short step to continue the work of both offices within the responsibilities of a single commissioner. The single office has not only worked well in practice, but has also facilitated significant savings. Now, turning briefly to public standards, during the year in question, we received 192 complaints, and the outcomes of the investigations, including the comparatively limited number of breaches of the code and the minimal number of cases relating to members of public bodies, has meant that councillors and public body members have, in my view, generally applied high standards of conduct in undertaking their official responsibilities. The circulated note gives details of some of the key statistics. Convener, I'm not proposing to go through that. I'll just mention the completion timescales which we endeavour to achieve. We have targets to complete investigations within 3 months, 6 months and 9 months, the targets being 50%, 75% and 95%. And the actual investigations completed were in fact 87%, 97% and 99% respectively. Comparative years are also indicated in the table circulated. Just to touch very briefly on matters that are still very current for the Commissioner's office. First of all, local authorities must, in my view, continue actively, proactively, and as a significant priority to promote high ethical standards as a part of their arrangements for corporate governance. Some areas require continuing attention, and these are registration of interests, declaration of interests, planning issues, and conduct towards fellow councillors. Authorities are, in the main, very receptive to our approach during the investigations of councillors and are open to discussion and guidance on the code. The framework has been shown to work efficiently and cost-effectively in improving member behaviour. Outreach is particularly important in preventing inappropriate conduct and in raising standards generally, and this will continue to be major priority. I also propose to continue to work closely with Audit Scotland in line with our protocol to fulfil our respective statutory responsibilities as fully, effectively and efficiently as possible. The Model Code of Conduct has been before you, Convener, last week and has now been approved. I'm grateful for the Cabinet Secretary taking a number of my own comments submitted during the consultation exercise on board. And for my part, I consider that the new Model Code is robust, proportionate and fit for purpose. I believe the Ethical Standards Framework, which was a priority in the new Parliament's first legislative programme, and it's important to remember that, has impacted on standards in public life. The regulatory regime must continue to be applied fairly, effectively and proportionately to ensure it remains a facilitator of high standards and not an obstacle. Convener, this is my last annual report before I demit office, and I just wanted to take the opportunity to thank the committee for their unfailing courtesy that they've extended to me whenever I've attended. It's very much appreciated. And if I may, I'd also like to take the opportunity of putting on the record my appreciation of all my fantastic staff who have shown such commitment over the years. I'm indebted to them. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you, Mr Allen. I understand that this morning a nomination has been made for your successor, and that's Bill Thompson, who's currently the Assistant Chief Executive of the Parliament here. And that nomination, of course, will have to be ratified by Parliament at some point. I thank you for your comments this morning. I wonder, in light of your retiral and a successor coming into place, what advice would you give your successor in terms of taking on this role? And what could you see being done to improve the work that you and your office carry out?
Convener, first of all, I'd like to put it on record that I'm delighted to hear of the nomination of Bill Thompson. He will be an excellent commissioner, and I wish him all the best in the post. As far as advice is concerned, Mr Thompson will be his own man, but I think there are some lessons that can be learned. First of all, I think you've got to look a little bit at the context here, and I mentioned it in my own opening remarks that the Ethical Standards Act was one of the very first of the new Parliament. So the Parliament itself put a stamp on high standards being a preeminent factor and ethos for those in public life. That has been important, very important, because that ethos has cascaded down to the tiers of government below Parliament, such as local authorities and public bodies. The legislation has really provided a measured and tempered, strong ethical foundation. I've had the benefit of helping to shape the development of the ethical standards landscape. And when carrying out my responsibilities, I've tried to be proportionate. I've tried to be educative where I can, but I've also tried to apply sheer common sense, because that is a commodity that is sadly lacking on many occasions these days. And I would commend that continuing approach to my successor. it's important that ethical standards is embraced by all those in public office, because at the end of the day, we want to ensure that the public continue to have trust and confidence in their elected members. I mentioned that I think you've got to be proportionate when you are a regulator. I think you do have to avoid unnecessary regulation, and you need to focus on improvement. You do have to be very willing, I think, to outreach into the local government community, the public bodies community, and discuss what the principles are in public life that the Parliament wants to see applied in practice, and to assist in them in ensuring that their members carry out in the best possible way. I'm pretty content, Convener, that these sentiments will be shared to some extent anyway by my successor.
Thank you. Mark MacDonald, please.
Thank you, Convener. We just had a session prior to your arrival with the COSLA Commission on Strengthening Local Democracy. One of the questions I asked was around whether the Commission would look at the issues around transparency, accountability. For example, I made the point that proceedings here are recorded both in terms of the verbatim record, but also in terms of television and webcasting. That doesn't happen in many council chambers. From your perspective, would that strengthen the role of the Commissioner in terms of, instead of on occasion having to rely on a he said, she said basis, having a verbatim report and possibly also televised proceedings or webcasted proceedings might provide some strength to the work that you do investigating issues around breaches of the Code of Conduct?
Thank you, Convener. The answer to that is, in relation to complaints that are about misconduct in the council chamber, the recording of those events would certainly be beneficial. And there have been a number of cases where the council, where the recording has materially helped in us being able to reach a conclusion on the matter. But I think there is a wider issue as to whether local government in the wider sense is best served by the full glare of the publicity that would be occasioned by having television cameras in the council chamber. It is a wider issue. Would it limit debate? Would debate be less robust? Would people be playing to the gallery? You see, but all these considerations apply to the Parliament, and it hasn't detracted from them. The one major difference in the local authority is that they are making decisions about individuals, planning applications, housing applications, social work cases, road schemes, all the time, that have an immediate impact on their electorate. And I would be, whilst I can see the benefit from the point of view of promoting openness and transparency, I think there has to be a wider debate before that is applied, certainly on a mandatory basis, to local authorities.
Mr MacDonald, do you want to come back?
Well, just a couple of follow-ups, Convener. Firstly, have you and your office been invited to make any submission to the Commission on Strengthening of Local Democracy, given the obvious interface that you have with local government, but also other aspects of local democracy?
Mr Allen?
No.
Would you welcome the opportunity to make a submission?
I'd be welcome to. I'd be happy to provide any information to a commission that was appropriate for the task. And if the Parliament were to invite me to make a submission, I would unhesitatingly do that.
To invite you to make a submission, Mr Allen. It is the Commission's responsibility, and I would hope that they will invite you to make a submission to their deliberations.
Final question, if I may, Convener, and that is around the issue of conduct and conduct at meetings. In terms of the role of the Commission, and as a former local councillor, I really should know this, but I'll ask the question anyway. Do you have to wait for a complaint to be made in order to trigger activity, or are you able to be proactive on the basis of something that occurs? I'm thinking in particular, for example, we recently saw a fairly critical Audit Scotland report in relation to the conduct of meetings at Aberdeen City Council and the impact that that conduct had on the decision-making process. Is that something that crosses your radar, or do you require a complaint to be instigated before you can take any interest in that sort of thing?
Mr Allen.
Convener, I think I would draw a distinction between conduct that relates to a specific complaint and broader issues about conduct. In respect of a specific complaint, that has to be sent to me in law by a complainer. And before I look at it, I have no power on my own bat to go out and investigate. There are such powers in other jurisdictions, but not here in Scotland. That applies in respect of councillors, members of public bodies and MSPs. On the wider front, I mentioned in my opening remarks that very keen in working, for example, with Audit Scotland. Without going into the Aberdeenshire example, which you've... Aberdeen City.
Just so Aberdeenshire Council don't look at the official record and wonder what was being said about them.
Very much so. Thank you. Thank you. Audit Scotland will carry out, as part of their audit process, and submit a report, and there will be occasions when they see issues of corporate governance that are turned by the conduct of their elected members. We try and work closely together with Audit Scotland. There is a statutory obligation on us to work together. And in one particular local authority, Argyll and Bute, the Audit Scotland have made a number of criticisms of the council corporately regarding the conduct of elected members. The council and Audit Scotland have asked us to assist in that way, and we will do what we can to try and encourage the raising of standards in that authority. And I would like to pay tribute to the council for coming to us and asking if we can help. As I say, we knew about it because we were consulted by Audit Scotland as well. But it's quite a good example, I think, of us trying to work together positively to create a better environment and higher standards generally.
Ms Hayne, if you want to come in at any point, just indicate. I'm conscious that I'm going to Mr Allen all of the time. Just let me know if you want to come in at any point. Mr Allen, in terms of these alerts, if you like, from Audit Scotland in the case of Aberdeen City and Argyll and Bute, were you conscious as an organisation that there were difficulties before Audit Scotland highlighted these problems?
Generally speaking, Convener, I would say that we were alert to there being an issue because it's usually reflected in the complaints you do receive. They may not individually amount to breaches of the code. They're perhaps not severe enough for that. But the number that you are receiving will on occasion give you an indication that there is a wider issue, which we will often discuss with the chief officers of the local authority, often the chief executive and the monitoring officer.
And in that regard, do you have a role in alerting other organisations about any difficulties?
I think the overview that's taken of the work of the office is set out in the annual report, and I do explain there if there are issues that have to be addressed by the wider local government community. In the annual report, in the current annual report, I'm stressing again the importance I attach to the responsibility of local authorities themselves to promote high standards and providing more detailed advice to elected members on matters such as registration of interest, declaration of interest and planning and so on. So I try and alert local authorities to these current issues.
John Wilson, please.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning. Can I take up the issue that you've raised in terms of Argyll and Bute and the identification of issues and you used the term council. Could I clarify whether or not that was council officials that made the approach, or was it collectively the elected members and council officials who made the report?
Mr. Allen.
Well, I'm satisfied that the council corporately wishes to make an approach to improve their performance. As I understand it, the council as a whole have committed themselves to doing what they can to improve their performance in this area. I'm quite satisfied that that's the correct approach to the matter.
The reason why I asked the question, Mr. Allen, is that as an elected member, a local council elected member, a number of years ago, I had occasion to report a council official to the line manager and to the executive director of a department. And what was identified at the time as, while I was an elected member, I was under the Code of Conduct and Ethical Standards. However, there's no such Code of Ethical Standards for council officials and how they carry out their duties, other than any internal disciplinary matters that could be dealt with by the council itself. And it's just the issue about the onus, and the reason tying in the Argyll and Bute question is, was it and the reason for asking, was it the council officials, senior council officials? You've said the corporate entity of Argyll and Bute. And I'm just trying to get down to what is the corporate entity of Argyll and Bute. And I understand that, quite rightly, that everybody within the council, elected members and officials, would want to try and resolve the issue. But it's just whether or not the initial approach was made by the chief executive and the officers of the council.
I think in normal course all contact is made by officers on behalf of the authority. But I would like to emphasise this point, and Mr Wilson has already made the comment himself. You know, I think we've got to give some credit to Argyll and Bute for collectively being willing to address the problems that have been identified, in particular by Audit Scotland.
Mr Allen, just to move on, you made reference earlier about the model code of conduct for members of devolved public bodies that this committee discussed last week, and we had the Cabinet Secretary for Finance in front of us giving evidence on that piece of the legislation or the guidance being issued. Last week's meeting, I suggested to the Cabinet Secretary that we should extend the Code of Conduct to ALIOs and other bodies being established by local authorities to take on local government services. Would you agree with the extension of those ALIOs and other bodies?
Mr Allen.
It's a very important question, Convener. I think it is a matter that deserves proper public scrutiny. I wouldn't like at this stage to say simply, yes, it should be extended, but I think there is an issue. But I would like to make...
Because I think there's an important point to be made here. Obviously, councillors on ALIOs are still covered by the code, but others on those ALIOs are not. Has there been any point during the course of an investigation that you have made where there has been a difficulty in terms of dealing with a councillor who may have broken the code, and you know full well that maybe others have too and haven't been able to deal with it in the appropriate manner because of circumstance?
The short answer to that question, Convener, is no. As you very rightly point out, councillors who have been appointed by their councils to ALIOs, and indeed members of public bodies who have been appointed to similar organisations, are caught by the respective codes for the work they are doing on these bodies, whereas the non-council, non-public body members are not caught. But no, the answer is I haven't come across that being as a problem in this particular area. Otherwise, I think I would have come along to the Parliament and say this is an issue, the regime has to be extended to apply to this area. And it's interesting to note that, as far as complaints are concerned, the number of complaints we receive about public bodies generally are significantly smaller than those in respect of local authority, notwithstanding that public bodies spend as much public money as do local authorities themselves.
That could possibly do with the number of people that are covered by the code, because we do have 1,222 councillors covered by the code at the present moment. In relation to the issue, and move on to the conduct of elected members. Now, one of the issues that's been raised with me by several councillors is the conduct of, particularly in the council chamber. Mr MacDonald made reference to it about the televising or the recording, verbatim recording of council meetings. And it's been described to me that in a particular council, and I won't name that council at the present moment, but in a particular council, it's like going into a bear pit. The language that's used, this courteous to your colleagues goes right out the door as soon as you walk into that chamber because of the way that members are treated. Have the Commission at any point visited a council chamber during a full council meeting or what may be a particularly contentious committee meeting to sit in the background to actually observe the conduct of local authorities? And I know that a number of years ago there were particular local authorities in Scotland that were always in the headlines because of the, I think on a couple of occasions, police involvement in removing members from the council chamber. Has the Commission ever thought of just basically cold calling on a full council meeting to observe the behaviour in a local authority where there are a number of complaints have been received about the code of conduct of elected members?
Mr Allen.
Convener, the short answer to that again is no. I'm not convinced that that would really be in the overall public interest. I have to respond to complaints that are formally submitted to me. I do...
there, Mr Allen.
Yes.
The fact that you have to be reactive in these situations, and you said common sense should apply at the very beginning, which I'm a great believer in common sense and gumption. Would it not be better if you had the ability, and your investigations team had the ability to do that cold calling and be much more proactive, and maybe in some regards put a shot across the bows of some of the folks who are behaving in inappropriate manners?
You know, I could go this far and say I think that approach merits serious consideration. As I said, other jurisdictions, commissioners have the authority to carry out that type of function. And I think there is merit in that. But I wouldn't like to overstate it. As I say, we do have general duties to work along with Audit Scotland and public bodies where we think there are issues. That is done. It's done perhaps more subtly than just sitting in a public gallery to listen in on what's happening.
An eye-opener, I can assure you.
It may be an eye-opener, I'm not quite so sure, but I very much understood Mr Wilson's point.
I wonder if Ms Hayne has a view on this.
I very much concur with what Mr Allen has said. I think there's also consideration to the remit that we have and the fact that we are spending public money, and if we don't have the remit to do anything about anything we encounter, then we have to give consideration to that.
So is the remit maybe a bit too constrictive?
As I say, I think the issue that you raise is a very important one. I think it merits further consideration. I'm not shouting from the rooftops to have those powers, but I can see it would provide a broader range of powers that might help in raising standards.
Mr Wilson.
Thank you, Convener. It is about the wider powers too, and it's not just about going ahead with dealing with complaints, but it's that to send a message out to particularly local authorities and elected members that they could be observed and their behaviour could be monitored, particularly, as I said, the description of the bear pit that some elected members feel they go into. And I do know that speaking to members of the public who observed a recent council meeting could not believe what they were saying or hearing because of the conduct and the language used by members in that chamber. But that then leads on to the formal complaints, the complaints made. Now, I've also heard that stated that some elected members will not make complaints because they feel the Office of the Commissioner for Ethical Standards does not either deal with these complaints seriously, or they feel they'd be a waste of time making an approach to the Commission in relation to any complaints they wish to make. And given that only 10% of complaints received proceed to formal proceedings, what would be your assessment of these comments about there's no point in actually making a complaint because it won't go anywhere?
Mr Allen.
These are views that haven't been put to me in the manner or scale that Mr Wilson has mentioned, but every complaint that comes in is investigated initially. Now, a percentage of them we can identify as either being unlikely or probably not going to be a breach of the code, or they're too trivial to be investigated. And they can be dealt with on that basis. But each complainer receives a reasoned letter explaining why the matter is not going to involve a breach of the code or the other reason for not taking it to a full investigation. It is so that only in a quarter of our cases is there a full-blooded investigation that involves interviewing witnesses and so on. And these are the complaints that are at the higher end of responsibility. But that's the way it should be, because we must approach our functions in a proportionate and reasoned way.
I accept that any organisation, any commission should deal with issues in a proportionate manner. But the issue that I'm raising is the number of complaints received, and you indicated that only 25% of these complaints go to formal proceedings and investigation. Can I ask, how does the message get out there? How do you get the message out in relation to the role of the Commissioner's office? And how do you publicise the work that either the committee, apart from the annual report, the Commission does, and how do the public get to hear about how they would go about making a complaint against any member who's involved in public bodies?
Mr. Allen. First of all, the office does not rely on the annual report for communicating with local authorities. We encourage the promotion of roadshows with local authorities. They can be individual meetings with councils, or they can be held on a regional basis. They're frequently with the Standards Commission for Scotland. We do that jointly, and we endeavour to meet all local authorities, either individually or regionally, to deal with current issues, to address any questions they've got. They are extremely positive. Just last month I was down at one local authority in the south where there were 95% of elected members that came to the session on promoting ethical standards. I was absolutely delighted to see that. That way we can communicate at best one-to-one, office to local authority, and I think you really then get your message through. Once you start, as it were, diluting roadshows to perhaps national conferences or regional conferences, I'm not sure that makes quite so much impact. And although it takes more time to go and see individual authorities, I think a great deal has to be said for going down that line and further.
Convener, my original question was about how you get the message over to members of the public and how they know that the Commissioner's office exists. Because one of the is fine doing roadshows to elected members to advise the elected members how they should conduct themselves in public life. But the issue is how do we get that translated into members of the public? Because I have had members of the public approaching me and telling me that they've had a horrendous experience at the hands of an elected member when they've approached an elected member at a surgery or in a public place. And it's really, how do we get the message out to the public that elected members and members of public bodies are accountable in a manner that's appropriate?
Mr. Allen.
We do provide the public with a whole range of leaflets. We're on the website and so on, and I'd like Helen to tell you about that in a second. In overall terms, it seems to me that the public are not unwilling to come to my office if they, because they don't know about the office. I think they may not come to my office because they feel that they are fighting against the machinery of the public service. That would be a matter of regret. But we do endeavour to be as positive as we can with people who are making complaints or people who are phoning in or writing to us to say that they're considering making a complaint.
Yes, I think given that the vast majority of our complaints are from members of the public, then the message is getting out there to the public. We do make our information available at libraries, councils, public bodies, and obviously the most important is the internet and how that's the medium that people use to find out information, and obviously the information about how to complain about your councillor or your member of public body is available on our website.
Sorry, Commissioner, just two other questions. One is, does the Commission receive complaints that they cannot investigate?
Mr Allen. That's
out with the scope of the Commission.
Yes, we do. I think, turning to Helen again, I think we've got about 5 or 6 that are out with jurisdiction in the current year, and that's a typical figure.
Ms Hayne, do you want to add to that?
Yes, the type of complaints that we might receive out with jurisdiction are perhaps against an official or a community councillor. They're usually the most common.
Just in terms of, you say an official, I take it that's an official of the public body and of a local authority?
A chief executive of a public body, for example.
That's fine. The final question I'd be glad to hear, Convener, is just really in terms of the register of interest. I know that there has been a number of complaints in previous years, and usually it gets heightened at the time of just prior to an election or immediately following an election. I'm aware that there is a duty on elected members and board members to make the appropriate declarations of interest and that register to be kept. I've also heard complaints that local authorities do not update the registers as often as they should be updated. And has there been any discussion with local authorities, both the official level and elected member level, about ensuring the accuracy of the register and the timely updating of registers on the council websites?
Mr Allen.
I agree with the thrust of what Mr Wilson is saying there. I think that local authorities could do more to assist elected members in filling out registration forms and also in giving them advice when it comes to issues which can be very difficult sometimes, relating to declaration of interests at committee meetings. Now, as far as registration of interests is concerned, local authorities generally do invite elected members periodically to update the register of interests. But it can be a tick box exercise, and I'm not convinced that they couldn't go the extra mile and discuss the register periodically with elected members. We have had some cases where there has been a failure to register, and they have gone to breach and been reported to the Standards Commission, where the failure to register was, in my view, inadvertence. And there is an issue as to whether, in reporting formally, where the matter is trivial, it's inadvertent, and when the elected member has made a full and immediate apology, as to whether it's appropriate to submit a formal report to the Commission, which is currently required. So, in summary, Convener, the answer is I do think elected members, I do think local authorities could do more to assist elected members in carrying out their statutory responsibilities regarding registration.
Yeah, sorry, one small further question, and it is about the register of interest, and it's about declaration of interest at a committee meeting or a full council meeting. We have a situation in one of the local authorities that's covered in central Scotland, where a number of values have been established by that local authority, and a number of members of the council sit in those alios. And in one particular committee, I think there's 3 alios now exist, where the convener of the committee and other members of the committee sit in the alio that is then reporting to the committee, the council committee. What would be appropriate in the circumstances in relation to declarations in that committee? And would it be appropriate that the elected members make a declaration at every meeting that an item from that, where they sit on a board of an alio, make a declaration appropriate to that committee meeting?
Mr Allen.
First of all, as a matter of generality, the new code that was approved by Parliament in December 2010 took this very much on board and made it clear that if an elected member had been appointed to an alio, as you say, then that by itself does not create a conflict of interest. And therefore, elected members who have been appointed to alios, when matters relating to the alio come back to the local authority, there is not an obligation. There's not an obligation to refrain from attending that discussion. In certain circumstances, they do have to declare that interest. But that is pretty fully set out now in Section 5 of the Code, and that was drafted with the intention of providing clarity, greater clarity on that issue.
I accept that, Mr Allen, but given that 3 years is a long time in politics, and we have seen an increase in the number of alios being created, and the issue would be whether or not elected members it would be permissible for elected members not to make a declaration, particularly if the local authority was deciding to allocate additional finance to that alio in pursuance of the objectives of the alio.
Mr Allen.
I think as a broad principle, the reason that the Code allows members to participate is that in the public interest, it's appropriate for elected members to say that whilst I'm a member of an alio, I can still take part in any decisions by the local authority relating, in your example, to the financing of that alio. Because to preclude those members from taking part in the debate in the council chamber would be a disproportionate response. It's a matter at the end of the day for the government and the Parliament as to how they want to see the code being regulated. But I'm satisfied at the moment that the balance is entirely appropriate.
I think, before I take in Mr Buchanan, I think in terms of the 2010 changes, many local authorities interpreted the legislation, the guidance, sorry, differently from others. And whereby in my last wee while on the council in Aberdeen, you know, we were told at that point if you declared an interest, you had to leave the room after the 2010, whereas previously a member could declare an interest and remain in the room. And I felt much more comfortable being able to say, I belong to such and such a body. The public then know that I am. And then, you know, if they choose to come to you, then that's a matter for them. Whereby now, you know, in terms of some of the interpretation that there has been of that code, folk just don't declare anymore because they're told that if they do declare, they have to go.
The 2010 code makes it clear when there is a financial interest. It sets out the circumstances where you can still participate, such as in the case of alios, membership of other devolved public bodies and so on. It then says when you have to declare an interest, and it then says whether you have to leave the room or not. So there are various stages which have to be gone through. And
I think it's the interpretation of that guidance.
Well, yes, indeed, but the code itself is very neatly structured, and it was designed to facilitate elected members and officials to be able to go through it and to come up with the correct conclusion. I accept there may be difficulties in interpreting it at some stage, but I think the code does a very good job in making it clear what should be done and what should not be done.
Okay, thank you. Mr Buchanan, sorry to keep you waiting so long.
Okay. I noticed, just changing the subject, there was a lot of complaints about breach of confidentiality, multiple complaints. you didn't provide any sort of detail about this, what breach of confidentiality meant. Could you explain a bit in more detail why they weren't considered?
Ms Hayne, do you want to deal with this?
I would need to consult the database to identify exactly which cases that refers to and exactly what the subject matter was, and I'm very happy to provide that information to you.
It was up from 1, I think, to 25 complaints of confidentiality, but there were multiple complaints. Does that mean by the same people, or...?
Sorry, yes. There was, for example, one complaint, and it was against 9 members. So because there are potentially 9 different outcomes, that's 9 complaints, but it's dealt with as one case. It can potentially inflate the figures, which it has done in this case.
That's what it means, right? Thank you, yes. And the other thing I was going to ask is, the complaints that are initiated by the councillors, the outcome of complaints continues to show that the majority were considered within 3 months and were rejected, sort of thing. And there's been comments about that. Could you comment about that?
Mr. Allen or Ms Hayne?
I think
you're saying it's the thoroughness of the investigation might be at fault here.
I think I said earlier that every single complaint that comes into the office is subject to an initial investigation, which is thorough. But a view has to be taken as to whether any further investigation involving interviews would serve any useful purpose. And over the years, you can see which cases are going no further. They are not going to involve a breach of the code. Sometimes the complaints can involve matters of trivia and are certainly not appropriate for further investigation. The ones that are sent out for further investigation are given an extremely rigorous study, and these are the ones that are more likely to be considered as possible breaches. That's not to say that they are concluded as being a breach, because you will see that last year we came to a conclusion of breach in something like 5 cases.
Thank you.
Often your complaints come from elected members about other elected members, a number from the public about elected members. Can I ask how you protect a member of the public who makes a complaint and then maybe a witness from any backlash? I've heard of a situation where during the course of an investigation, a member of the public received communication from lawyers during the case of your investigation into somebody. How do you protect members of the public from that kind of intimidation?
This is an important issue. First of all, if the complaint is from a member of the public, when we advise the elected member of the complaint, then the identity of the complainant is under data protection limited. The name will be given, but not the contact details. But at the end of the day, the elected member has to be told what the complaint is. And our practice is to say, there's the complaint. What have you got to say about it? We don't paraphrase it. We don't summarise it. We say, there's the complaint. What do you say about that? So at the end of the day, if there has been contact between the complainer and the elected member prior to the submission of the complaint, the elected member will know fine the identity of the complainer. That can't be helped. That cannot be helped.
I understand that fully, Mr. Allen, and you know that is the way it is always going to be. But during the course of your investigation itself, if there is communication between the elected member or an elected member's representative, whether that be legal or otherwise, to a member of the public, do you not see that as being a little bit intimidatory? And how can we stop that kind of scenario from happening?
That's a very important point. We would not want to see in any shape or form any kind of intimidatory conduct by a respondent against a member of the public. But I would have to say that I have not come across that. There has to be, on occasion, continued contact between an elected member and a complainer.
Do you think that maybe you haven't seen that because members of the public are too scared to come forward and tell you that this has happened during the course of your investigation?
I think that's a different matter, Convener, with respect. But if you are a complainer, you have complained about elected member, you're saying, should the elected member, is it acceptable that he intimidates the witness or she? Absolutely not. I agree entirely with that approach. What I am saying is that when an investigation is in course, the spotlight is on the elected member, and in my view, the elected member is careful about what he or she does vis-à-vis contact with witnesses. And I don't really have much knowledge of there being any form of undue pressure on witnesses.
I think that's very interesting. Ms. Hain, do you want to add to that?
I don't have any further information on that. I agree with what Stuart said.
That's very interesting, and maybe we can follow up on that later. Mr. McMillan.
Thank you, Convener. Just for the interest of transparency, obviously in the current year I was subject to a complaint. But certainly the questions I've got are just regarding also the annual report that we do have. Is it a fair assumption to suggest that after an election, then the number of complaints against, well, whether it's councillors or MSPs, does increase? Particularly because of the number of new people who will actually be elected to that particular body.
Mr. Allen.
It's a very interesting question, Convener, which I've been frequently asked. And the answer is that there is no real pattern about it. First of all, immediately after an election, most councils have an induction programme for their new elected members. They get elected in May, they then go into recess, so for 6 months it's unlikely there'll be a lot of complaints coming in because they've been bombarded with advice about how to act properly, and also they've been in recess. And so there isn't usually an appreciable rise once after the elections. New members, of course, are extremely keen to become aware of what the Code of Conduct is all about. The other side of the coin is, well, are there more complaints up to in the period prior to an election? And that can happen. It tends to be localised, where there are conflicts within particular local authorities. They can come to the surface. But I've always been surprised that there hasn't been a great overall increase in the number of complaints in a period prior to an election. And it'll be interesting to see if we receive more complaints in the period between now and the referendum in September next year.
Also, with the annual report that we're discussing, the outstanding complaints had increased from 36 in the previous year to 56. Is there any particular reason why there is an increase in the outstanding complaints?
No particular reason why. There were a few more multiple complaints received prior to the end of the year, which, if they take the normal time to complete, 3 months, then they are carried forward to the next year. So there's a higher number of complaints at the end of the financial year.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr McMillan. Obviously, Mr Allen, there are times where complainers are very unhappy at your decisions. And a lot of folk would argue that, they're not vexatious complainers, and they do not feel that they have been treated fairly in terms of the dealing with their complaint. Sometimes that's down to communication. I wonder if you could tell us how you communicate with complainers to let them know exactly why it is you've reached the decisions that you have.
Well, first of all, every complainer is given the best of attention. Any complaint is treated with the utmost seriousness, and it's addressed as such. Where a complaint has been subject to an initial investigation and the decision has been taken that there is not a breach of the trust and that there is no purpose in investigating the matter further, the complainer will receive a reasoned letter explaining why the decision has been taken not to proceed with a further investigation. And that should articulate fairly clearly what the principal reasons are. Now, that's not to say that the complainer necessarily agrees with that. In the case of complaints which are subject to a fuller investigation, there will be a note of decision which will set out the complaint, the response, the investigation process that was undertaken. It will set out the full facts of the investigation, and it will set out the findings and conclusions. And that should be sufficient for any party, complainer, respondent, or member of the public, fully to understand the reasons for the decision.
Obviously, today we're not here to deal with individual complaints, but I have a copy of a letter that a complainer has received back from your offices. And to be quite honest with you, the language is not particularly helpful. And I think that, that you should maybe review the way that you respond to folk in, shall we call it, plain language rather than bureaucratic speak, if you excuse the expression. I realise that you've got to spell out parts of the code and all of the rest of it in that correspondence. But, I think sometimes we make a rod for our own backs in public service by using the bureaucratic speak rather than the plain language that folk would expect. I wonder if you've got a comment on that.
I'm very happy to take your comments fully into account.
Thank you. In terms of complaints from organisations rather than from individuals, I wonder if you deal with them in any different manner. And I wonder if you deal with complaints where there is a whistleblowing element differently from others too.
First of all, complaints about organisations, I don't think we do particularly.
From organisations?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, complaints from organisations. I don't think we do treat them any different from a complaint from an individual. We do occasionally get complaints from organisations because there is perhaps a corporate issue, such as a planning application where the applicant has been a corporate body. We'll look at that, and there is no reason why we shouldn't. But to deal with your question, I don't think we treat them any more differently from any other person who submits a complaint.
In cases where there is a whistleblower involved, are you careful about how you handle that? Are they treated in a different manner? If the evidence from a whistleblower is confidential, how do you deal with that?
In the case of whistleblowing, the whistleblowing legislation relates to the employer-employee situation. A whistleblower is not whistleblowing to me, he is a complainant.
Let me give you...
Just let me finish, please,
Sure.
Convener. In the case of someone submitting a complaint to us, our primary focus is whether there has been a breach of the code by the respondent councillor. Now, in order to ensure that we deal with the matter fairly and thoroughly, it is essential that the respondent is afforded access to the totality of the complaint. Now, I mentioned earlier that we do not provide the address or telephone number of certain of individuals. But that is all we can do, because often it will be relevant to preparing a defence in relation to a complaint that the councillor is apprised of the totality of the complaint. That is the major consideration. Now, if a complainer says to us, this is confidential and cannot be handed over to the councillor, we will go back to that complainer and explain why we think it is appropriate that it should be made available to the councillor so that he or she can comment on that. If the complainer declines that, then it is explained to him, then the value cannot be attached to that evidence as much as it could be if he were willing to expose himself to it being subject to examination by the councillor.
Well, can I follow that up? Because obviously, in some cases, you know, whistleblowing, let's use that term, can be very, very difficult, and people can be intimidated to a huge degree. And I just wonder if there is a way that you can put in place to ensure that the identity of someone who is prepared to put their head on the block, if you like, to expose something, if you can ensure, or we should ensure by maybe changing the legislation and guidance to ensure their safety during the course of this.
Convener, I cannot recall a case where we have not been able to explain successfully to a complainer that it is in the interests of justice that we are able to make this complaint available to the councillor so that he or she can submit a response.
Okay.
And I think that's important.
Back to that, Mr. Wilson.
Yeah, just to follow that up, Convener, the issue here is that while I understand, Mr. Allen, you make reference to councillors, but we have 1,300 bodies or 1,300 representatives on other bodies. And some of those bodies are boards such as the National Parks Authorities, Further Education, NHS boards and regional transport partnerships. What happens if an employee of those public bodies wishes to register a complaint but wish to do it with some anonymity in relation to the complaint they're raising, how would the Commission deal with that type of complaint? And would you give potentially an employee the anonymity, or would you refer them to the whistleblowing legislation?
Mr. Allen.
Well, I think really I've answered this, convener. When a complainer writes into us and says, well, I want you to regard this as confidential, then we explain why that is inappropriate. And I've also said I have no experience of complainers then declining to proceed with the complaint on that basis.
And do you think
if there is an element of criminality involved, then the matter will be passed on to the police for further investigation.
Okay, I think that is quite useful, and maybe now is the time to bring this to a close. Can I thank you for your evidence today, Mr. Allen and Ms. Hayne. I know that you've got a little while to go in post, Mr. Allen. I wish you all the best for the next few months and all the best with your retirement after that, and thank you. I suspend the meeting and we'll move into private session. Thank you.